The woman at the door was wearing a diamond bracelet that Sophie recognized. It was the one her husband, Mark, had claimed was a client gift he'd already given away. The woman's name was Tanya, and her smile was as sharp and cold as the November air. "Mark isn't just leaving you," Tanya said, leaning against the doorframe of Sophie's beloved home. "He's sold me the house. I have the papers right here." She dangled a set of keys and then delivered the final blow. "You have 24 hours to get your things and get out." The house on Willow Creek Lane wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was Sophie's entire history. It had been her grandmother Margaret's, a sprawling Victorian with a wraparound porch and gardens that Sophie tended to with an almost religious devotion. For 15 years of marriage, this house had been their shared world. Or so Sophie believed. She was the quiet, steady caretaker of their life, while Mark Davies, her charismatic, handsome husband, was the one who faced the world, cutting deals in the city as a high-powered consultant. "It's a partnership," Mark always said, patting her hand. "You make the home, I make the money." But in the last year, the partnership had felt dangerously imbalanced. Mark was changing. He was home less, and when he was sealed inside his home office, his voice a low, urgent murmur on calls he always ended the moment she walked in. The password on his laptop, once Sophie1, was now a 16-digit string of random characters. "We need to be more careful, Soph," he'd said just last month, rejecting her request to repair the historic greenhouse roof. "The market's volatile. We're tightening our belts." Sophie, ever trusting, had agreed. She started using her own small savings, a stipend from her grandmother's will, to buy the heirloom seeds for the garden. She'd clipped coupons. She'd assumed tightening our belts was a we problem. She didn't know it was a her problem. She didn't know, for instance, about the $10,000 dinners at Le Ciel or the client gift, a delicate platinum-set diamond bracelet from a boutique called Argento's that she'd found the receipt for. When she'd asked, Mark had laughed, a short, sharp sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Just currying favor with a new investor, darling. It's already been sent. Forget about it." Sophie had forgotten. She had forced herself to forget, to believe the man she loved. The house was her sanctuary, her one constant. Every morning she'd walk the grounds, deadheading the roses, feeling her grandmother's presence in the rustle of the ancient willow trees. The house was her identity. Mark handled the finances, the taxes, the boring stuff. She handled the life. The last time she'd seen Mark had been 3 days ago. He'd kissed her cheek, his mind already on the plane. "Big deal in Chicago, Soph. Could be a game changer. I'll be unreachable for a few days, so don't worry. I'll call when it's done." "I love you," she'd said. "You too," he'd replied, his eyes on his phone. Now, standing on her own front porch, Sophie looked at the strange woman wearing Mark's lies on her wrist. The woman wasn't just a threat. She was a symptom, the brutal, physical manifestation of every late night, every secret call, every clipped response. The volatile market wasn't the economy. It was her husband. And the game he was a game changer for wasn't his career. It was his marriage. 24 hours, the woman, Tanya, repeated, her voice laced with a victor's amusement. "Or I'll have you removed for trespassing." Sophie's first reaction was pure, paralyzing shock. Her mind simply refused to process the words. "Trespassing? This is my home. My grandmother left it to me. There must be some mistake." Tanya let out a short, pitying laugh. "Oh, sweetheart, that's what they all say. My home. My life. You need to understand. Things have changed. Mark and I are together. And this house? It was his to sell. "He can't sell it," Sophie said, her voice a thin whisper, but a seed of anger was starting to crack through the ice of her disbelief. "It's not just his. We're married." "Exactly," Tanya said, stepping forward, forcing Sophie to take a step back into her own foyer. The scent of Tanya's perfume, a heavy, expensive musk, was an invasion. "You're married, which means his debts are your debts, and his assets are his to manage. And he managed this one right into my portfolio. He's very motivated." Tanya looked around the foyer, her eyes scanning the antique wallpaper and the polished hardwood floors with a look of open disdain. "God, this place is a mausoleum. The first thing I'm doing is tearing out all this dark wood. We're going for an open plan, minimalist look. Mark loves my taste." Every word was a calculated strike. Every word was designed to dismantle Sophie's reality. "Get out," Sophie said, the words finally finding their strength. "I don't think so," Tanya said, pulling a folded document from her designer handbag. "This is a deed of sale, signed by the sole proprietor, Mark Davies. It was finalized yesterday. This house is legally mine. You are the one who needs to get out." She threw the document onto the antique console table by the door. "Be smart, Sophie. Don't make this messy. He's already chosen. Don't you want to keep your dignity?" Tanya turned and walked away, her heels clicking a sharp, triumphant rhythm on the stone pathway. She got into a gleaming black convertible, a car Sophie had never seen before, and sped away. For a full minute, Sophie didn't move. She just stared at the spot where the car had been, her heart hammering a deafening, panicked beat. Then, she ran to the console table. She snatched up the paper. It looked terrifyingly official. Legal letterhead, notary stamps, and at the bottom, Mark's familiar, arrogant signature. Her hand shaking, she ran to the front door and locked the deadbolt. A hollow laugh escaped her, locking the door, as if the danger wasn't already inside, living in her memories, sleeping in her bed. She did the one thing she could think to do. She pulled out her phone and dialed Mark. The call went straight to voicemail. "Big deal in Chicago. I'll be unreachable." "Mark!" she screamed at the phone. "Mark, who is she? What did you do?" His pre-recorded voice was the only reply. "Hi, you've reached Mark Davies. Leave a message." The silence that followed was heavier and more absolute than anything she had ever known. She was alone, in a house that was no longer hers, with a life that had just been declared a lie. The 24-hour clock had started ticking. The house felt different. The familiar, comforting shadows now seemed to stretch and twist, filled with menace. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that usually soothed Sophie, now sounded like a bomb counting down. 23 hours. She spent the first hour pacing, dialing Mark's number over and over, as if the sheer force of her will could make him pick up. Voicemail. 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 She tried his office, a polite, late-night recording. She even tried calling the hospital, a cold knot of dread in her stomach, wondering if he'd been in an accident. But a part of her knew. That woman, Tanya, was no accident. She was a plan. The panic gave way to a cold, practical dread. Papers! I need to find my papers. She went to Mark's office, the one he'd become so territorial about. The door was locked. This was new. In 15 years, he had never locked his home office. "My own home," she whispered, the irony stinging. She went to the kitchen, retrieved a screwdriver, and, with a grim sense of violation, pried the lock open. The wood splintered. It felt like a metaphor. The office was clean. Too clean. His main desk was clear, his laptop gone. But in the top drawer, he'd been careless. Sophie pulled it open. It was a tangle of charging cables, old keys, and receipts, and underneath it all, a slim, leather-bound folder. She didn't recognize it. She opened it. Inside were documents she had never seen, bank statements from an account she didn't know existed, credit card bills for staggering amounts, the jewelry from Argento's, yes, but also hotel suites, first-class airline tickets, and dozens of charges from a restaurant called Tanya's Bistro in the city. It wasn't just a mistress, it was a whole other life. And then she found it. Tucked in the back was a file labeled WC Property. Not Our Home, not Willow Creek. WC Property. An asset. She pulled out a thick document. It wasn't the deed of sale Tanya had. This was something else. It was titled, The Margaret Sterling Irrevocable Trust. Sophie's mind flashed back. She'd been 22, her grandmother frail but sharp-eyed in her hospital bed. "I'm leaving you the house, child," Margaret had said, "but I'm not leaving it to your future. I'm putting it in a trust. It will protect you. It will protect this house. Mr. Harrison will handle everything." Mr. Harrison. A name she hadn't thought of in years. David Harrison, her grandmother's lawyer. A dry, kind, ancient man who smelled of old books and peppermint. Sophie had signed the papers, a young bride-to-be, dizzy with love for Mark and grief for her grandmother. Mark had been there. He'd been the one to review it all. "It's a standard living trust, Soph," he'd explained, kissing her forehead. "It just means the house is yours, protected. It's smart." Now, reading the legal jargon, her blood ran cold. She saw her name as beneficiary. She saw Mark's name, added after their marriage, as trustee. She didn't know what it meant. Did trustee mean he could sell it? Was that what he'd done? Had he bankrupted them? Was this house, her one sanctuary, the only thing left to pay for the life he'd been hiding? She looked at the clock. 10 a.m. Her fingers, still trembling, Googled Harrison, Stern and Associates. The firm was still there. The website listed an emergency line. A groggy voice answered. "Harrison Legal." I need to speak to Mr. David Harrison," Sophie stammered. "It's an emergency. My name is Sophie Davies. I'm Margaret Sterling's granddaughter." There was a pause. "Mr. Harrison is retired, Mum, but hold on. The name is Davies." "Yes. Please, I think he sold my house." Another, longer pause. "Mr. Harrison's son, David Jr., now runs the practice. I will wake him. Do not, under any circumstances, leave that house. Do not let anyone in. We will be there at 9 a.m. sharp. And Mrs. Davies, don't sign anything." The line clicked dead. Sophie slid to the floor, the cold hardwood, a sharp contrast to the fire of fear and anger burning in her chest. She clutched the trust document. The siege was no longer just Tanya. It was Mark, and her only hope was a man she hadn't seen in a decade. Sophie didn't sleep. She sat in her grandmother's armchair by the living room window, the trust document in her lap, watching the sun rise. The new light didn't bring hope. It just illuminated her battlefield. At 8:30 a.m., she made a pot of coffee, her movements robotic. She was dressed in simple slacks and a sweater, a stark contrast to the pajamas she'd been in when Tanya first arrived. She felt like a soldier arming herself. At 8:45 a.m., the rumble of a large engine broke the morning silence. It wasn't Mr. Harrison. A large, yellow U-Haul truck trundled up the long driveway, followed by Tanya's black convertible. This time she wasn't alone. She got out of the car, along with two large men in matching Priority Movers t-shirts. Tanya, dressed in an immaculate white pantsuit, strode to the front door and began pounding on it. "Sophie, your 24 hours are up." Well, I got impatient. Let's get this over with, shall we? Sophie opened the door, stepping out onto the porch to block the entrance. I told you to get out. You are trespassing. Tanya laughed. That's adorable. You're trespassing. Boys, start with the porch furniture. That hideous wicker set has to go. One of the men, looking hesitant, approached the antique bench her grandmother had loved. Ma'am, are you sure? The lady's still here. She's a squatter, Tanya snapped. I'm the owner. I have the papers. Now move it. No, Sophie said, her voice shaking but firm. She stepped off the porch and stood directly in front of the bench. You will not touch a single thing. Oh, for God's sake, Tanya sighed, pulling out her phone. You want to do this the hard way? Fine, I'll call the police and have you arrested. Go ahead, Sophie said, bluffing, her heart hammering. Where is Harrison? Get out of the way, you pathetic, Tanya began, stepping forward, her hand raised as if to push Sophie. I would strongly advise against that. Ms. A new voice, crisp and authoritative, cut through the tension. A dark green, classic Bentley had pulled silently into the drive, parking directly behind Tanya's convertible, blocking her in. A man in a perfectly tailored grey suit stepped out. He was perhaps in his late 50s, with sharp blue eyes and a full head of silver hair. He carried an old, battered leather briefcase. David Harrison, he said, offering a curt nod to Sophie. Junior, my father sends his regards. He always was very fond of your grandmother. He then turned his cool gaze to Tanya. And you are? I'm Tanya Johnson, she said, thrown off by his sudden appearance. I'm the new owner of this property. This woman is refusing to leave. Is that so? Harrison said, looking at the U-Haul, the two movers, and Tanya's furious expression. A hostile takeover. How very dramatic. You gentlemen, he said to the movers, can stand down. There will be no moving today. I'm paying them, Tanya shrieked. And you will pay them for their time, Harrison said calmly. But they will not be touching Mrs. Davies's property, because you, Miss Johnson, are not the new owner. I have the deed, she yelled, fumbling for her bag. Yes, I'm sure you have a deed. I, however, have the trust. Shall we discuss this inside? As if summoned by the escalating drama, a third car roared up the driveway, skidding to a halt on the gravel. It was Mark. He burst out of his rented sedan, his hair wild, his suit rumpled. He looked like a man who had flown all night. He stared in horror at the scene. His wife on the porch, his mistress on the lawn, a strange lawyer, and a moving truck. He had been playing two separate games, and his worlds had just violently collided. Sophie! Tanya! He barked, trying to seize control. What the hell is going on here? Tanya, I told you to wait. Wait for what, Mark? Tanya snarled, her fury now redirected to him. For you to grow a spine. I'm done waiting. I bought this place, and I want her out. Mr. Davies, perfect timing, Mr. Harrison said, his voice dropping an octave, all pleasantry gone. You've saved me a phone call. Since all parties are present, I suggest we convene in the living room, immediately. The living room, usually so warm and inviting, was thick with a toxic silence. Sophie sat in her grandmother's armchair, the trust document on her lap like a shield. Mr. Harrison stood by the fireplace, his briefcase on the mantel. Mark and Tanya stood on the opposite side of the room, near the door, a team that was clearly moments from self-destructing. Mark was sweating, his eyes darting between Harrison, Sophie, and Tanya. Tanya was vibrating with impatience, tapping her foot on the priceless Persian rug. All right, you've had your little drama, Tanya said, crossing her arms. Here is the deed of sale. She marched over and slapped the paper on the coffee table. Signed by Mark Davies. Notarized. It's done. This house is mine. Now tell your client to pack her bags." Mr. Harrison picked up the document. He held it up to the light, his expression one of mild curiosity, as if examining a mediocre student's art project. "A deed of sale," he mused. "It certainly looks like one. The letterhead is very convincing. The notary stamp, a bit blurry but passable at a glance, and the signature, Mark Davies, as sole proprietor." He looked at Mark, a small, cold smile playing on his lips. "That was your first mistake, Mr. Davies. Sole proprietor. A critical, and I must say, fatal error." "What are you talking about?" Mark blustered, trying to regain his footing. "It's a simple transaction. I sold the house." "You can't sell what you don't own," Harrison said simply. Tanya laughed. "He's her husband. It's marital property. He owns half." "No," Harrison said, his voice suddenly booming in the quiet room. "He doesn't. And that, Miss Johnson, was your first mistake. You assumed. You didn't do your due diligence. You didn't run a proper title search. If you had, you would have found what I am about to share." Harrison clicked open his briefcase. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound document, a twin to the one on Sophie's lap, but this one was the original, bearing the raised seals of the court. "This," he said, "is the Margaret Sterling Irrevocable Trust, established in 2009. It is a legal fortress designed by my father for one purpose, to protect this house and its beneficiary, Sophie Sterling Davies, from precisely this kind of predicament." He turned to Sophie, his eyes kind. "Sophie, your grandmother was a very wise woman." He turned back to Mark. "An irrevocable trust is, as the name implies, irrevocable. It cannot be changed. It cannot be dissolved by the trustees. The house, Willow Creek, does not belong to Sophie. It belongs to the trust. Sophie is the sole lifetime beneficiary, which means she has the inalienable right to live here, unbothered, until her death, at which point the trust passes to her chosen heirs." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But what about Mark?" Tanya demanded, her voice rising to a shriek. "He's a trustee." "Correct," Harrison beamed, as if she'd solved a complex riddle. "He is a trustee, or rather, he was. Mr. Davies, as trustee, was given a single, solemn, fiduciary duty to protect the asset, this house, on behalf of the beneficiary, his wife. His job was to pay the taxes and maintain the property, using the funds from the trust's auxiliary account." Harrison walked over to Mark, who had gone a pale, sickly grey. "The moment you signed this piece of fiction," he tapped Tanya's deed, "with the intent to sell the trust's primary asset, you did not just break your marriage vows, you committed a catastrophic breach of fiduciary duty. You violated the terms of the trust." But the money," Mark stammered. "Ah, yes. The money," Harrison said. "Let's talk about the money." Mr. Harrison's voice, though perfectly modulated, seemed to suck all the air from the room. "Sole proprietor. A critical, and I must say, fatal error." Mark's face, which had been a mask of bullish confidence, flickered. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm her husband. It's marital property. It's a simple transaction." "No, Mr. Davies. It is anything but simple," Harrison said, his calm a scalpel. He walked over to the grand mahogany desk that had been Sophie's grandmother's. He placed his briefcase on it and clicked open the brass latches. The sound was as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. He didn't pull out a single document. He pulled out 3 thick, separate files. "Let's begin with your first mistake, shall we? You assumed this house was a marital asset. A rookie mistake. One that a simple, 20-minute title search would have corrected. He turned his piercing blue eyes on Tanya, who was still clutching her fraudulent deed. "Miss Johnson, you paid for this document, but you clearly didn't pay for a lawyer to read it. If you had, you would know that this house, the land it sits on, and everything within it, is not owned by Mark Davies. It is not owned by Sophie Davies." "What?" Tanya barked, a harsh, humorless laugh. "Who owns it, then? The ghost?" "In a legal sense, yes," Harrison said, his face devoid of emotion. "It is owned by the Margaret Sterling Irrevocable Trust." He let the words hang, a legal incantation that changed the very atmosphere of the room. "An irrevocable trust, Mr. Davies," he continued, now focusing his full, devastating attention on Mark, "is a legal fortress. It is designed, as the name explicitly states, to be irrevocable. It cannot be altered, it cannot be dissolved, and its assets cannot be sold by its trustees. Your late mother-in-law, Margaret Sterling, was a very wise and a very cautious woman. She did not leave this house to Sophie. She left this house for Sophie. Sophie is the sole lifetime beneficiary, which means she has the inalienable right to live here, unbothered, until her death." Sophie, frozen in her grandmother's armchair, felt the first true breath enter her lungs in 24 hours. A fortress. Her grandmother had built her a fortress. But I'm the trustee," Mark spouted, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "The bank, the papers, I'm the trustee. That means I'm in charge." "That," Mr. Harrison said, "is your second and most catastrophic mistake. You were indeed named trustee, a title I assure you my father argued against. But Margaret was a romantic. She believed in the sanctity of your marriage." Harrison picked up the first file. "Being a trustee does not mean you are in charge. It means you are a servant. You had one single, solitary legal obligation, a fiduciary duty to protect the primary asset, this house, on behalf of the beneficiary, your wife. Your job was to pay the taxes and maintain the property using the funds from the trust's auxiliary account. Nothing more." He held up Tanya's deed. "The moment you conspired to sell this house, the moment you created this fraudulent document to remove the beneficiary and liquidate the asset, you did not just break your marriage vows, you committed a catastrophic, criminal breach of fiduciary duty." "So what?" Mark blustered, sweat now beading on his forehead. "So I'm off the trust. Fine. We'll sort it out. It's a civil matter." "Oh, Mr. Davies," Harrison said, a note of genuine pity in his voice, "we are far, far beyond a civil matter." He opened the second file. It was thick with bank statements and receipts. "You see, I wasn't just called this morning. My firm has been actively monitoring this trust for the last 6 months. My father, as I said, was old school. He put a small flag on the account, a simple notification that would alert us to any unusual activity. For 14 years it was silent. Then, about 24 months ago, the repairs started." Sophie's head snapped up. "Yes, Sophie," Harrison said, his eyes meeting hers with a sad kindness. "You know what I'm talking about. The auxiliary account, which was left with a healthy 7-figure balance for maintenance, suddenly got very busy." He pulled out a statement. "September 2023. A $50,000 withdrawal for a new roof. I must say, Mr. Davies, your paperwork was quite detailed. The invoices were very convincing, except for one small problem." "What?" Mark whispered. "I had a roofer, a structural engineer, and an insurance adjuster inspect this house last Tuesday," Harrison said calmly. "The roof, as Sophie well knows, is the original 1920s slate. It hasn't been touched in decades. It is, in fact, in desperate need of the repair you claimed you made." He pulled out another. January 2024. A $35,000 withdrawal for a full plumbing upgrade. Again, fascinating. The city permits office shows no such work was ever filed for, and our plumber confirmed the pipes are, like the roof, original. He kept going. March 2024. $20,000 for foundation repointing. April. $15,000 for landscape restructuring. In total, Harrison said, you have embezzled $284,000 from your wife's trust fund under the guise of repairs. You stole from her, Mr. Davies, repeatedly. You let her live in a house you were legally obligated to maintain, a house that is, as you put it, drafty, while you bled it dry. Mark was white. Sophie felt a wave of nausea. All those times he'd said, we can't afford it. He was actively stealing from her. But where did the money go? Harrison mused, as if to himself. He looked at Tanya. That's the fascinating part. The $50,000 roof withdrawal, for example, coincides perfectly with a wire transfer to a certain high-end jeweler, Argento's. Tanya's hand, which had been resting on her hip, instinctively went to the diamond bracelet on her wrist. The client gift. Sophie stared at the bracelet, her blood turning to ice. My roof, she thought, is on her arm. And the landscaping funds? Harrison continued, his voice relentless. They match, dollar for dollar, the down payment on a brand new convertible. The one, he glanced out the window, parked in the driveway. Tanya's composure, so smug and unshakable, finally cracked. Her mouth fell open. You told me that was from the Chicago deal. Ah, yes, the deals, Harrison said, turning his attention to the third file. This one was thinner, but it seemed to hold a special venom. This brings us to the why. Why the sudden, desperate theft? Why the high-risk, amateurish fraud? Because, Mr. Davies, your consulting business is a phantom. That's a lie, Mark shouted, finding a last burst of indignation. I have clients. You have victims, Harrison corrected. Davies Solutions, LLC, is a shell, a front. For years, you've been running a small-time Ponzi scheme, taking investments from one person to pay dividends to another. But you got greedy, and the market turned, and suddenly you were out of cash. The well was dry. You were about to be exposed. He looked at Mark. You've been leveraging this house, your wife's house, as proof of your stability. You brought investors here for parties, didn't you? Showed them the garden, the history, made them feel they were investing with old money. It was true. Sophie remembered the strangers, the endless, smiling colleagues Mark would bring home. She'd been an unwitting prop in his con. You were desperate, Harrison said, his voice dropping. So you tried to get a loan. 6 months ago, you went to the bank and tried to take out a $250,000 home equity loan. But you couldn't, could you? Because the bank, unlike Ms. Johnson, did a title search. They saw the irrevocable trust, and they declined. And they called us. He smiled, a thin, cold, reptilian expression. That was the tripwire, Mark. That was the moment you went from a petty thief to our primary target. And now, Harrison turned his full attention to Tanya. The bank said no, he said softly. So you needed a new source of funds. Let's say, private investor. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. Someone who was, perhaps, emotionally compromised and blinded by the prize. Tanya, for the first time, looked afraid. What are you talking about? I'm talking about your purchase. This, he tapped the fraudulent deed, is a work of theatre. He couldn't sell you the house. He never intended to. He just needed your money. He was running, Mark, wasn't he? He was planning to take your cash and disappear, leaving both of you to fight over the scraps. No, Tanya whispered. How much did you give him, Ms. Johnson? Harrison asked. Tanya's eyes were wide. The deposit. To secure the sale, to clear the old mortgage. There is no mortgage, Harrison thundered, his voice finally rising. This house has been owned free and clear for 50 years. He lied to you. How much did you give him? $300,000, she whispered, the words a death rattle. $300,000 on top of the $284,000 he'd already stolen. Tanya, baby, listen, Mark began, moving toward her. Don't touch me, she hissed, her entire body shaking. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not the powerful man she was aligned with, but the desperate, cornered con man who had just taken her for everything. You, she stammered. You used me. You took my money. You sold my condo. I sold my condo to pay for this. You told me she was a pathetic pushover and this house would be ours. And you believed him, Harrison said, closing the final file. The sound was one of absolute finality. You, Ms. Johnson, are the victim of a $300,000 scam. You can, of course, sue Mr. Davies for the return of your funds. But, he gestured to Mark, I suspect you'll be getting in a very, very long line. I doubt he has a penny left that isn't stolen. The room was silent, save for Tanya's ragged, hysterical breathing. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been annihilated. Mark and Tanya, who had arrived as a conquering army, were now revealed as a fool and a felon. And Sophie, the shy waitress, the pathetic pushover, was the only one in the room who wasn't ruined. You, Tanya finally snarled, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, turning on Mark. You ruined me! And with a shriek, she lunged. The living room, usually a sanctuary of warm light and old books, had become a pressure cooker. The air was thick and toxic. Mark, the picture of the successful businessman, was now a cornered animal, his face a mask of sweat and disbelief. Tanya, the picture of the smug victor, was vibrating with a rage so potent it was visible. She stared at Mr. Harrison, her beautifully made-up face contorting as his words sank in. A story, she repeated, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. He sold me a story. A work of pure fiction, Harrison affirmed, placing the fraudulent deed back on the coffee table as if it were a piece of trash. He took your $300,000 as a deposit for a property he had no right to sell. He preyed on your, let's call it, eagerness to secure the win. You didn't do a title search, did you, Ms. Johnson? You just believed him. The $300,000. The number hung in the air. For Sophie, it was an astronomical sum. It was a new roof, a restored greenhouse, a foundation repair. It was all the things Mark had denied her, claiming poverty. Tanya's head swiveled slowly, mechanically, toward Mark. $300,000, she enunciated, as if learning a new foul language. Tanya, baby, listen, Mark began, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. It's not what it looks like. It's a temporary complication. This lawyer is just a shark. He's trying to scare us. Is that what you paid for your bracelet with? Tanya screamed, the sound ripping through the room, raw and sudden. She clawed at the diamond bracelet on her wrist, the one Sophie had recognized from the receipt. Is this my own money? Did you use my money to buy me gifts? Did you use her money? She jabbed a finger at Sophie. To pay for my dinners? Tanya, be reasonable. Reasonable. She lunged. It wasn't a ladylike push. It was a full-body tackle, a blur of white pantsuit and incoherent rage. She slammed into Mark, her manicured nails raking for his face. "I will kill you!" she shrieked, connecting with his cheek. "You ruined me! I sold my condo! I liquidated everything to get this house! You worthless, lying—" Mark yelped, a high, undignified sound, stumbling back over an ottoman and crashing to the priceless Persian rug. He was on his back, a pathetic, flailing heap, with Tanya on top of him, raining down blows. "Mr. Harrison!" Sophie gasped, instinctively moving to intervene. "Stay back, Mrs. Davies," Harrison said, his voice as calm as if he were ordering tea. He looked down at the undignified spectacle. "Miss Johnson, I would advise you to stop committing assault. It will only complicate your legal position." His words, cold and sharp, cut through Tanya's rage. She froze, her hand raised, her chest heaving. She looked at Mark, now whimpering and holding his bleeding cheek, and her expression of fury dissolved into one of utter, bottomless disgust. She scrambled off him, pulling at her now rumpled suit. He ruined me," she whispered, backing away, the tears finally coming, hot and black with mascara. "On the contrary," Harrison said, adjusting his tie, "I suspect you ruined each other. But your problems, Mr. Davies, are only just beginning." Mark climbed to his feet, using an antique chair for support. He looked at Sophie, his eyes, for the first time, filled with pure, unadulterated panic. The bluster was gone. The charm was gone. All that was left was the hollow, desperate core. "Sophie," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Zoph, please. Tell them, it's a misunderstanding. It's just money. We can fix this. You and me. We can sell the house. Together. Properly. And we can pay her back. We can start over. Just you and me. Like it used to be." It was the single most repulsive thing she had ever heard. Sophie, who had been a silent statue by the window, finally turned. The shock, the fear, the years of placid, trusting denial. It had all been burned away in the fire of the last 24 hours. What was left was a core of pure, cold, tempered steel. She looked at the man she had loved since she was 20. The man she had built a life for. The man who had, for years, been systematically looting that life, smiling at her while he did it. She saw him. For the first time, she truly saw him. A weak, craven, hollow man who had mistaken her kindness for stupidity. "Like it used to be," she repeated, her voice quiet, but it sliced through the room. "When was that, Mark? When you were telling me we had to tighten our belts while you were spending $10,000 at Le Ciel? When you were buying her jewelry and telling me the market was volatile?" She took a step toward him. He flinched. "I asked you about the greenhouse roof," she said, her voice shaking, not with fear, but with a terrible, icy clarity. "I told you it was leaking, that the 100-year-old glass was failing. You said we couldn't afford it. I used my own money, the stipend my grandmother left me. I used it to buy heirloom seeds for the garden, Mark, because I was trying to save us money on groceries." She let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded more like a sob. "And you were just looting. Siphoning money from my grandmother's trust, an account I didn't even know I could access, to fund this." She gestured to Tanya, who was now weeping silently into her hands. "Soph, I had to," he whimpered. "The business, it wasn't. I had appearances to maintain. I was going to pay it all back." "The business," Harrison interjected, "is the next item on the agenda." He walked to the center of the room, assuming a position of absolute authority. "You see, Mr. Davies, your problems are much, much bigger than a single fraudulent sale. My firm didn't just monitor the trust. When you tried to take out that home equity loan 6 months ago, It was a massive red flag. We started a full forensic audit. Your consulting firm, Davies Solutions, Harrison continued, is a house of cards, a classic Ponzi. You have no clients, not in the traditional sense. You've been taking investment from one desperate person to pay fraudulent dividends to another. You've been leveraging your appearance of a man who lives in this house to lure them in. Mark had gone a pale, sickly grey. And that, Harrison said, turning his cool gaze to Tanya, brings us back to you, Ms. Johnson. It seems your bistro was a primary vehicle for laundering that money. If Tanya had looked broken before, she now looked annihilated. What? No, he was an investor. He said they were investor stipends, cash infusions from his clients. I ran the books like he told me. You ran 2 sets of books, Ms. Johnson, Harrison stated flatly. One for the IRS and one for Mark. You've been washing his fraudulent investment money as restaurant profits. The district attorney will be very interested in hearing your explanation of that distinction. You're not just a jilted mistress, you're a co-conspirator. No, Tanya shrieked. He told me it was legal. You. She turned on Mark again. You didn't just use me, you implicated me. Mark was speechless, his eyes darting between Harrison, Tanya, and the front door, as if calculating an escape. And that was when the sound drifted in from outside. It was a sound that was not a Bentley or a U-Haul. It was a distant, 2-tone wail, growing closer and closer. Mark's head, which had been bowed in false contrition, snapped up. The blood drained from his face, leaving only the angry red scratches. What's that? A siren? Who's that? Did you call them? Sophie, you can't do this to me. You can't! I didn't call them, Harrison said, checking his watch. As I said, my firm has been cooperating with the district attorney's office for months. The loan attempt was the final piece of evidence they needed. Our investigation, which we filed yesterday, was what triggered the warrant. He walked calmly to the front window. Ah, and here they are, right on time. The siren stopped in the driveway. A moment later, 2 uniformed police officers walked up the porch steps. They didn't knock. Harrison opened the door for them. Mr. David Harrison, the first officer said, his hand on his belt. Yes, officers. Good morning. Thank you for coming. The man you're looking for is right here. Harrison stepped aside, revealing the scene. Mark Davies, the officer said, his voice a flat, official boom in the suddenly silent room. Mark, speechless, just nodded, his body trembling. You are under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, grand larceny, embezzlement, and securities fraud. The officer pulled Mark's hands behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound Sophie had ever heard. It was the sound of her past and his future snapping shut. You can't do this, Mark finally yelled, finding his voice as they began to lead him out. It was a pathetic, reedy sound. He twisted, his eyes finding Sophie. She knew all of it. She spent the money too. Tell them, Sophie. That antique table. He gestured wildly with his cuffed hands. She bought that stupid table. She spent the money. Sophie looked at the officer, then at Mark. Her voice was pure ice. I paid for that table with my grandmother's stipend, Mark. The one I used for groceries while you told me we were broke. It cost $300. From a thrift store. The officer looked at Sophie, then at Mark, with a look of profound weariness. You have the right to remain silent. Sophie! Mark screamed as they pulled him over the threshold. You'll be nothing without me. You'll be alone in that drafty old museum. You'll starve. You'll be nothing." His voice was cut off as the officer guided him into the back of the squad car. The second officer, a woman with a no-nonsense expression, turned to Tanya. "And you, Mom? What's your involvement here?" "I'm the victim," Tanya sobbed, her whole body shaking. "He stole from me. He stole 300,000. He implicated me. I didn't know. I swear." "Mom, you'll need to come down to the station and give a full statement," the officer said, her voice flat. She looked at Harrison. "You, sir." "And you, Mom," she said to Sophie. "My client will give her statement at a later time, at our offices," Harrison said, taking charge. "We will cooperate fully. For now, she needs to secure her home." The officer nodded. "Understandable. But you," she said to Tanya, "you're coming with us. You're a material witness, and frankly, a person of interest. Let's go." As the officer gently guided Tanya toward the door, Tanya looked back at Sophie, her face a ravaged, tear-stained mask. All the smugness, all the cruelty, all the power she thought she'd had was gone. She was just another one of Mark's victims, albeit a less innocent one. He never really loved me, did he?" she whispered, a desperate, childish question. Sophie looked at her. The woman who, 24 hours ago, had tried to destroy her life. She felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. She felt a profound, cold, liberating pity. "He didn't love anyone, Tanya," Sophie said, her voice soft. "He just consumed." Tanya was led away. The siren started up again, fading into the distance. The U-Haul was long gone. The movers had vanished. The black convertible and the rental sedan were left, abandoned, in the drive, like monuments to a war that was suddenly over. The house was silent. The silence was so total, so absolute. It was deafening. Sophie stood in the middle of her living room, her grandmother's trust document still clutched in her hand. The adrenaline that had held her upright for a full day drained away, and her knees buckled. She caught herself on the arm of her grandmother's armchair. "Mrs. Davies? Sophie?" Mr. Harrison was at her side, his voice suddenly full of concern. I'm all right," she breathed, sinking into the chair. What now? Truly. What happens now?" "Now," Harrison said, his voice firm but kind. "We restore order. We begin your life." He pulled out his phone. "First, I'm calling a towing company to have these 2 vehicles removed from your property. They are evidence in a civil case you'll be filing. Second, I'm calling a locksmith." "You were right." Sophie looked up. "Every single lock," Harrison said, a small, grim smile on his face. "And the gate, and the garage, and a full top-of-the-line security system. From this moment, you are the sole acting trustee. The trust is entirely in your control." Sophie nodded, the word control feeling foreign and strange. "The district attorney will handle the criminal case. We," Harrison said, tapping his briefcase, "will handle the civil one. We will systematically dismantle everything he built. We will reclaim every penny he stole from this trust. We will assist Ms. Johnson's lawyer in suing him, as it will only help our case. By the time we are done, he will have nothing. You, on the other hand, will be made whole." Made whole. Sophie thought about the word. She didn't feel whole. She felt excavated, hollowed out. But the foundation was still there, her grandmother's foundation. An hour later, the cars were gone. A locksmith was already at work, the high-tech whir of his drill a comforting, modern sound. Sophie stood on her front porch, breathing in the cold, clean air. It smelled like freedom. "He was right about one thing," she said quietly, as Mr. Harrison prepared to leave. "What's that, Mrs. Davies?" She looked up at the beautiful, flawed, magnificent house. Her home. It is a drafty old museum. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. That greenhouse roof. That's the first thing I'm going to fix. Harrison smiled back, a genuine, warm smile. My father would have liked that. The trust account, now that it's no longer being pillaged, is quite healthy. You can fix whatever you like. It's all yours, Sophie. It always was. He got into his Bentley and drove away. Sophie stayed on the porch, listening to the sound of the new deadbolt clicking into place. She was alone. But for the first time in 15 years, she wasn't. She was home. And just like that, the nightmare was over. Sophie stood on her porch, the keys to her new locks in her hand, and watched the last car drive away. The woman they thought was a shy waitress, a quiet, domestic pushover, was the one left standing. She wasn't just the wife. She was the owner, the protector, and the survivor. Mark had tried to steal her house, and Tanya had tried to steal her life. But they both forgot one crucial thing. You should never, ever underestimate the person who knows where all the roots are. They know the foundation, and they will not be moved. What did you think of Sophie's story? It just goes to show that the quietest people often have the deepest strength. Have you ever been in a situation where you were completely underestimated? What would you have done if you were in Sophie's shoes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story and want to hear more tales of karma and justice, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.